Ahora vamos a mezclar el preterito y el imperfecto. So now we're going to mix the preterite and the imperfect tenses in the Spanish language. We'll do this all the time for telling stories, for narrating past events, and you'll see this throughout the course. This is really where kind of the magic happens in storytelling and using these past tenses in Spanish. So remember that the preterit answers the question, what happened, right? Past simple, things that happened and are finished. The imperfect talks about typically things that were ongoing on the past, right? What was happening. And we bring them together. We use them in a way that answers the question, what was going on or what was happening when something else happened, where you have an event going on and then something else that interrupts that event or changes it. And so that happens oftentimes in stories. Take a look at this story. Remember, you can click on the volume icon to hear a native speaker telling the story. But take a look at this little story here. Cuando yo tenía 16 años, yo un día salí en la tarde afuera y a mí me picó una víbora de coral. Entonces yo grité a mi padre, papá, papá, me picó un coral. Y mi papá llamó al vecino, buscaron una lámpara porque era toda la luz que había. Y bueno, fueron a buscar un carro, me amarraron muy fuerte para que no regara el veneno a mi cuerpo y me levantaron inmediatamente para el hospital. So when we translate this as, when I was 16 years old, one day I went outside in the afternoon and a coral snake bit me. So I yelled to Dad, 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 a coral snake bit me, and my dad called our neighbor. They looked for a lamp because that was all the light there was. They went to get the car. They tied me very tightly so that the position wouldn't flow to the rest of my body, or so the poison wouldn't flow to the rest of my body, and they immediately picked me up to take me to the hospital. So note there the changes in the different narration. This is using both the preterite and the imperfect. So you can notice there, like, cuando yo tenía 16 años, that's the imperfect, right? When I was 18 years old, right? Or 16 years old, excuse me. Yo un día salí en la tarde afuera, like, I went outside. So note there, right in the first sentence, you can see the mix between the past continuous, that imperfect, and the past simple. And throughout that entire story, you can see different examples there. Now the second narration just uses that past continuous or the imperfect. And you can read that one on your own, but note that all of those red verbs are using that past imperfect, and there's no preterite because there's not really a storyline. They're not talking about different events that happened, one after another, or one interrupting others, that kind of thing. So note there, there's different changes there in how you can tell stories using the different tenses. Typically, when you're telling a story that has something going on, and then other things happening or other things that happen to interrupt those events, that's when you mix in the past continuous and the past simple, or the imperfect and the preterite. You'll see some meaning changes when you're using either the imperfect or the preterite. So some verbs actually have different meanings depending on how you're using them in the past. One example is saber, which often means to know, but it can also mean to find out. And you can see a couple different examples, right? Sabía que tenía que buscar un mejor porvenir para mis hijos. So I knew that I had to look for a better future. So there you see sabía, I knew, or I didn't know. Yo no sabía. Very common there. Now, whereas I realized or I found out would be something like un día desperté y supe lo que quería hacer. One day I woke up and I realized what I wanted to do. Small differences there when you're using different verbs in the past. Of course, there's time duration as well. The preterite is used for generally a precise length of time, whereas the imperfect is indefinite lengths of time. And adverbs can really help us know which verb to use in Spanish. So oftentimes when you see things like todos los días, todas las mañanas, cada día, cada mañana, and these types of phrases, you'll be using the imperfect. Whereas with phrases like un día, una mañana, or repentinamente, súbitamente, bruscamente, that would be the instances in which you use the preterite or the past simple. And of course, there's different contexts and different examples that you'll see. As with languages in general, you'll see different exceptions and ways that things are used in different contexts and different examples. But really, the mixing of these two, the preterite and the imperfect, is kind of the magic that happens when you tell stories, when you hear stories, when you listen to stories, and then when you summarize and tell your own stories as well. So take some time to review these activities, these past tenses. Don't worry if you don't get them right away, but definitely start practicing them and think about ways in which you are interacting with them in your readings, in your listenings, and then in your projects as well. Adios.